Hello and welcome to the Shed Sounds Media YouTube channel. My name is Ian Beabout, and today I thought I'd like to try something a little bit different. So, recently I have moved, and in the process I sold off a lot of my CDs. But even in the time prior to that, there was a few years there where I just started my business and I wasn't really making an income. I was just building a resume. And so I let go of probably 2/3 of my CDs. And I would estimate at one point in my life, like college age maybe, I may have had close to 3,000 discs. And so I whittled that down to probably 300, and really just kept the essentials. But since I moved, I also upgraded my sound system to a Sony 7.1 Atmos system. And it was quite a considerable upgrade over what I had before, which the old 5.1 home theater that I had was still running on coaxial cables. Like HDMI in my audio setup is a brand new thing to me, even though I had been using HDMI for movies and for TV. But there's something about that high-speed connection that I don't think even a CD played through a traditional RCA connection, I don't think that's as good. The HDMI makes a huge difference in the new system. And on top of that, I also have a really comfortable listening space to absorb music again. And it seems like since I got that system for Christmas, I've seen a shift in my interest. Like for a couple of years there, especially around the pandemic, I was super into films. And I'm still super into films, but having a great sound system for the first time, and not just a great sound system, but a great room to enjoy it in, has made me want to go back and listen to music more often. I mean, it's made me want to go really in depth with my listening, and also on top of that, to try and search out the best possible versions. And I'm going to have another video on this because as sort of like a side plot, a side quest to this search for my old beloved discs. I've also gotten really into the band Genesis and their various lineups over the years. And so that's like a whole nother video I'm going to make about collecting the best versions of the Genesis discs. But today, I thought I'd show you this. A friend of mine who I guess is also a fan of the work that I do, like with Coloratura and MoonX and Cloud Over Jupiter. A friend of mine had a bunch of doubles of CDs, and I explained to him why I was looking for the discs. You know, I'm not looking to make a profit on them. I'm simply looking to absorb them and learn from them. Really, I mean, I do music for a living, and so I think that having a recording library that sounds great is really important for my business. So, okay, I'm going to open up this massive box. I mean, I don't know. Does 30 discs count as massive? I think massive would be more than 100. But clickbait sells. Clicks sell. So we're going to call this a massive haul. 30 discs. All right. I'm going to open this up, and I'm going to try and say something about each one of them. What you should know is that these are curated, and I got them very affordably. Once again, on the premise that they're for educational use, more than entertainment. But I was able to acquire these very affordably, and I didn't break the bank on them. And there were a number of things where I showed absolutely no restraint, because the price point was extremely affordable. And so I took the opportunity to not only get some releases that I used to have and don't have anymore and I absolutely adore. And I also took the opportunity to get some stuff I've never heard before. So I'm going to try and talk about each one that I've heard. And when it comes to the stuff that I've never heard before, I'm probably not going to say too much, but that would be a good opportunity for, you folks who are viewing this to give me some recommendations. Like if you see something that, I say I've never heard before and you go, wow, that's a great record. Please let me know in the comments because I will put that at the top of my listening pile and I'll check it out. All right. Time to open the box. Hide the spines. Don't want to give away the big reveal here. All right. So I kind of picked a stack that I think I'm going to be probably the most passionate about to start with. And we might move into some of the less familiar stuff as we go along. All right, so first up, Nursery Crime, Genesis. So I was talking about Genesis earlier and the fact that I've fallen head over heels in love with this band in the past 2 months or so. And, when I say that, I was head over heels in love with them 10 years ago. I first heard this album when I was still like in high school and I fell in love with the eccentricity of it and Gabriel's lyrics, Peter Gabriel's lyrics. You hear Steve Hackett doing tapping, like guitar tapping. And I hadn't heard that prior to, like Eddie Van Halen at that point. So hearing that on an album from 1971 was really impressive to me. And of course, this is the first album with probably the quintessential Genesis lineup, which is Tony Banks on keys, Mike Rutherford on bass and 12-string guitar, Peter Gabriel on flute and vocals, Steve Hackett on guitar, and massive talent Phil Collins on drums and backing vocals. My feelings on this album are a little bit mixed because on a personal level, I think I prefer I think this is my least favorite Peter Gabriel Genesis album. Now, I've never heard the first album before, and we're going to get to that in just a minute. But, there are no poor Peter Gabriel Genesis albums, and I would even say that there are no poor 70s Genesis albums, period. But the reason why this is my least favorite is because I like Trespass a little bit better. And it when I listen to Trespass, it feels a little bit, it feels a little bit more confident. Whereas I think this one is kind of the new band finding their feet and finding their voice. Fountain of Salmacis, I think, is the absolute classic here. And it's unbeatable. And I think that the disc is worth owning on the strength of that last track alone. And also I think Seven Stones is a fantastic track, the musical box. It's just my least favorite because I like the others so much more, especially Foxtrot. I think Foxtrot and really The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway are maybe the finest efforts of the early Genesis period. But I'm super happy to have this back in my collection. And we will cover this on if I do end up doing the collecting Genesis by the disc or buying Genesis by the disc video. We will talk about this more, but this is the definitive edition remaster, which back in the day was the first version of this album I heard, so it does have a nostalgic quality to it. But I think there's actually a better master of this available in my collection, and that is a story for another video. All right, on to the next one. All right, my friend who was kind enough to make the deal on this haul with me recommended this because not only do I love prog, but I also love new wave, and I dabble in punk a little bit. Although I'm a little less of a fan of punk, I tend to like punk bands like the Stranglers because the Stranglers to me weren't just punk, and I think that you'll find that's a theme in my work as well as the music that I tend to listen to. is that I don't like music that necessarily stays in one place or sounds too much alike. Oop, see the spines. That sounds too much alike. I like it when every song is a little bit of a different flavor of the band. And so with that in mind, I've never heard this record. This is the first Pretenders record. I picked this up from Gary because he said I would love it. So, I guess we'll find out. If you're watching this and you're a fan of this, and if you're a fan of this Pretenders record, please leave me a comment and, tell me how great it is, and I will put it near the top of the pile to check out. All right, Pretenders, self-titled. All right, this is I want to say a mid to late 80s pressing of the first Genesis record, which was called From Genesis to Revelation. I've never heard this. And I'm on a mission to hear every Genesis record, with the exception of maybe Calling All Stations. I just don't really care for that one, what I've heard of it. But with the exception of that one, I would like to eventually collect and absorb every Genesis album, possibly up through We Can't Dance. There's still like those last 3 or 4 pop era 80s Genesis that everybody knows, and I've never heard them. So there's like a major gap in my knowledge that I'm going to have to fill very soon. But this is the first Genesis album, and I looked it up, and this is apparently a decent copy of this. There's a lot of different versions of this going around with different titles, different cover variations, and they're very common to bump into if you look for CDs, because I guess there's no copyright on this, maybe because it's just been reissued to death. But apparently this is one of the better reissues, and it is a West German pressing, which I think most fans agree are excellent. But yeah, I'm excited for this. This has bonus tracks on it and stuff. And I've heard some of the bonus tracks are rather great and potentially even better than the album. So yeah, looking forward to checking this out and filling that early gap, in my Genesis knowledge. It's like, I know Genesis best from Trespass Through Duke. And I've kind of only recently heard like Seconds Out, and then There Were Three. So yeah, I'm starting because like with Genesis and we're going to continue talking about them, but with Genesis, when I started out, I was really into Peter Gabriel, and along with that, I was really into Gabriel solo records as well. And it took me a while to kind of get out of that prog snob mentality of, Phil Collins ruined Genesis, and, the pop era sucks and all this other stuff. But, I've opened my mind to that stuff, but I'm still kind of in the process of hearing and absorbing it. So I feel like when it comes to Genesis, my absolute favorite stuff is the early stuff with Gabriel. And I said earlier that I think this is my favorite album of the Gabriel period, with The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway coming very close and possibly tying. But this is another one I'm so happy to have back in my collection. Can Utility and the Coastliners that might be the best thing Genesis ever did. And, I love stuff, again, like Duke and Wind and Wuthering, Blood on the Rooftops and One for the Vine are two of my favorite songs. But for just pure, like, early 70s arty greatness, I think Can Utility and the Coastliners and the final song on this disc, Supper's Ready, just cannot be topped. And I think that if you want to show somebody what Genesis are all about, show them this record, because it's a little bit pop, it's a little bit prog, it's a little bit light, it's a little bit dark. It's like a friend of mine said on Facebook, and I'm kind of stealing his comment, so thank you. But I agree with it. I think that's what makes Genesis work, is that there's a little bit, there's shading. There's light and dark areas, and not everything is black or white. And something like Supper's Ready, to me, feels like about 5 or 6 pop songs all strung together in this surrealist tapestry. And I love it for that. It just makes it endlessly re-listenable for me. And, also on this disc, you get Watcher of the Skies, which is an absolute classic Genesis recording. And I feel like Geddy Lee, like if you ever hear Geddy Lee from Rush talk about the first time he saw them, and they opened with that, and that just like opened his mind to whole new possibilities. And I relive that vicariously every time I hear this song. I think of a young Geddy Lee watching this and getting his mind blown. And so what a great opener, and what a great record. There's not a bad song on this. Again, sound quality wise, I'm not sure this is the best version even in my collection, but you'll have to let me know if this is intriguing you enough for the Collecting Genesis video that I've been thinking about doing. All right, so next up, Selling England by the Pound. This is another, I said Foxtrot and The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway are like perfect records, and this is too. And I could certainly see this album easily being somebody's favorite Genesis record, because you have Dancing with the Moonlit Night, which is kind of like prog rock meets Mahavishnu Orchestra with a little bit of plain song at the beginning. It's such a brilliant piece of music and such a great way to start a record. I Know What I Like in Your Wardrobe, which is almost one of their first pop, like pure pop statements, I think. And I think one of their first hit singles too. Firth the Fifth is an absolute masterpiece. Tony Banks' writing shines on that record, on that song in particular. And you have this 2-minute stretch where Steve Hackett gets to stretch out. And I know I said Can Utility and the Coastliners, but I think Firth the Fifth comes close to being my favorite Genesis track. Battle of Epping Forest, I'm hit or miss on. There are bits of it that I really like, and I think overall it's good, but it kind of loses me in a way. And it doesn't, the magic isn't there for me as quite as much as some of these other tracks, including the next two. After the Ordeal and the Cinema Show are fantastic. Also, I just noticed that this is a little bit different than the version that I used to own, because the Cinema Show and Isle of Plenty are listed as one song, which is kind of fascinating. I'm pretty sure that the previous version I owned of this had that separated. Again, this is a duplicate in my collection, but I'm nerdy and I'm trying to come to a conclusion as to what the best versions of these are, what the best masters are. And I also have another cool version of this that I will have to show on the Genesis Fit. I'm going to have to do that. Like, I keep talking about it, and I'm so passionate about this band. I'm going to have to do that, collecting Genesis by the disc. How does that title work? Like something like that? Would that grab you? Let me know. All right. An absolute masterpiece. The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. What I love about this one is that it in many ways to me predicts Gabriel's solo career. And I feel like he changed as a vocalist on this one, and he became more punky, more raw, whereas some of the early vocals, Musical Box excluded, of course, could have sort of a mellower voice, but I feel like here he's close to shouting a lot of the times. And like back in New York City, sort of predicts On the Air, like that, the track from Peter Gabriel 2. And there's even a song near the end called In the Rapids, which sounds like a prototype of Family Snapshot from Peter Gabriel 3. So again, this is very much a band effort. Like if you look at the actual writing, again, it's a lot of Banks and Rutherford doing the heavy lifting. And I think that this kind of goes against my preconception that Peter Gabriel was the main writer in the band. And I've recently kind of discovered the error in my thinking. And I definitely think that separates the Gabriel solo from the Genesis era quite a bit. And it explains also why the Gabriel solo era is so interesting. He managed to cover a lot more ground, and I think break a lot of new ground as a solo artist than he did as a member of Genesis. However, the Genesis albums with him, to use the word that I said a little bit ago, are magical. There's an absolute, it's like a spell has been cast when you play an early 70s Genesis record, and this is no exception. I think, and I know that the actual guys in the band are a little bit mixed on their feelings on this one, but I think it's the finest hour or one of the finest hours for Genesis as a collective. And every member of the band has a moment to really shine on this record. I love it. I don't want to ever do without it again. The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, Genesis, one of my absolute favorite records. One of my favorite double albums too. I am not of the crowd that thinks that it would be better as a single disc. I don't want to lose anything from that album. I love it as 2 discs. I love the time it takes. I love being able to just be transported by music for 2 hours in a way that albums like The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway and The Wall are capable of doing. I'm a big fan of double albums, and I would point to that one as being one of the all-time greats, really. All right, this is a Peter Gabriel single, and this was actually a freebie. He just kind of threw this in, I think, because he didn't need it. It was a double or something. I like Digging in the Dirt. It's a cool tune, and I think it has influenced my writing a little bit. I won't be specific, but for those of you who are familiar with the WTF Was That LP, you might pick up on some lyrical influence from this tune, but I won't say any more. I'll let you discover on your own. But yeah, not much to say about this one. I'm not a collector of singles. I would rather have the album, but as a freebie, I think it's cool, and I do like the song. And I think maybe this may have some non-album tracks too. So that's rather awesome. All right, next up, another album I know nothing about. And that's Steve Hackett's Stormwatch? No, to watch the storms. It's misspelled. Watch the storms. I guess you could say it with like a heavy English accent. To watch the storms. It's terrible. Again, this is a song this is an album that I know absolutely nothing about. I never really collected Steve Hackett. My impression of Steve Hackett, if I'm being completely honest, is that he makes the kind of prog music that I don't care for. And if you like Steve Hackett, feel free to tell me in the comments all the reasons why I'm wrong. But I have a DVD called Spectral Mornings that I think is of Hackett's first solo tour. And my impression of it was that it was a little bit too much of the goblins and fairies and dragons kind of prog rock that I'm not so fond of. So, with the exception of Voyage of the Acolyte, which I used to own, and I really like that album. I'd like to have that one back on disc. But this was the only Hackett that he had to offer, so I just decided to take it because I'm interested in all things Genesis and their various solo permutations. Looking forward to checking this out. Again, if I'm wrong about Steve Hackett, let me know in the comments. And if this is like a masterpiece, I'll put it at the top of the pile. Just let me know. I will definitely prioritize it if you guys think it's great. All right, on to the next stack. So now I thought I would move on to a stack of discs that I'm going to have considerably less to say about and probably will go by a lot faster. Pretty much both of these artists here I don't know particularly well. But first off, Billy Cobham. I have a collection of his discs here that here I'll put kind of the one everybody knows on top. But I have a collection of his discs here, and this was a case of I like Mahavishnu Orchestra, in particular the first 2 albums, but I've heard nothing but great things about Billy Cobham as a solo artist, and specifically Spectrum. At this price point, I decided to go ahead and pick up 3 more Billy Cobham discs, mostly because a friend of mine was like, you have to have them. And I tend to listen to friends who know my tastes. But the other 3 are Life and Times, which I guess I could try to recreate the cover here. Also, great cover art in this. A Funky Thide of Sings. Great cover, great title. I'm glad I picked it up just on that merit alone. Next up, what is this one? Inner Conflicts. I believe this is the one that has Ruth Underwood on it, the marimba player from Frank Zappa's band. I know nothing about this artist or these albums, and and if you like them, you'll have to let me know in the comments, because I will put them right at the top of the to listen pile, and give these a shot. I'm really excited. All right, Billy Cobham. One more artist in this stack, and that is The Clash. And I think that this just made this one of the most eclectic hauls possibly I've ever received at one time, because you have the likes of prog, you have the likes of new wave, you have the likes of punk, you have jazz fusion. So covering a lot of ground here, which is cool. I'm happy to expand my listening. But again, I don't know The Clash outside of the song Train in Vain. And I just thought, all right, I'll check them out based on that. This other album is a double. Well, I should say this one is a triple album, this is a triple disc collection, and I assume these are their first 3 records. I know nothing about The Clash other than I'm familiar with London Calling. I'm familiar with London Calling, the cover art, and of course, and I may have actually owned it and heard it at one point, but I don't remember that much about it. But I believe that these are their first 3 albums altogether, and it's the remastered versions. So, I know that remasters can be a little bit hit or miss, but this is a late 90s master from Sony, so it probably sounds all right. I also got Sandinista, which is another one that my friend told me that I had to hear. He loves this album, possibly more than even London Calling. I just thought, why not? Again, if you love these records, let me know in the comments, and I'll give them a listen. This is a discovery pile for me. Have not heard a single one of these albums before. All right. We're halfway there, folks. This has got to be, 15 discs so far? Absolute classic here. Tears for Fears, Songs from the Big Chair. Every single song on this is great. And I stayed up until almost 3 in the morning this morning listening to listening to several of these albums. And it was actually mostly in this pile and the next pile that I listened to. But I hadn't heard this album all the way through in a couple of years. And every song is great on it. I know that Shout for some people is overplayed. But I've never been one, at least within the past few years, I've not been one to allow the amount of times that I've heard something, and I guess also the contexts in which I've heard something, to distract me from appreciation. I think that's an important skill to learn as music fans. Like, no matter how many times I've heard Tom Sawyer by Rush, I still absolutely love it. And I love the Moving Pictures album. So no matter how many times I've heard Shout and Everybody Wants to Rule the World, I still love those tunes. But that being said, I think the absolute masterpiece of this record is Broken and Head Over Heels with the Broken live coda. I think this is absolute pop songwriting perfection. And those 3 tunes in a row, I think, are possibly only topped by their next album, The Seeds of Love, which is actually my favorite Tears for Fears record. It's a little bit more retro, it's a little bit more Beatlesy, psychedelic, but I kind of see it as fitting in with the same era as albums like Skylarking by XTC or Around the World in a Day by Prince, where you have these semi-established, well, I guess established 80s pop artists referencing the music of the late 60s and embracing their love for the Beatles and Pink Floyd and the Beach Boys. And I think that there's a lot of that in this record, and every single song is great. I already had this one. I was kind of lucky and snapped up a copy of the 5.1 box set of this, the one that's remixed by Steven Wilson. But I decided to get this anyway. Number one, for the price point, and number two, because I don't think the Wilson box set actually includes the original mix, the original master. I think that the version of the original mix that's in that box set is the remaster. So I was kind of curious to hear what this sounded like when it first came out. I will give this a listen. Although, again, the 5.1 of this is, oh man, it's so immersive. And I can't imagine this replacing it as my go-to version. But yeah, I love this record. This is my favorite Tears for Fears record, and I have played it to death. I know it by memory at this point. And it's probably one of those albums that has had a subconscious influence on my work in many ways. So, all right. In the interest of keeping artists together, I know I split up all that Genesis madness with the Pretenders. I'm gonna pull one more album from these guys from the stack, and that's The Hurting. Now, I haven't spent a whole lot of time with this album. I used to own it, but I kind of got to the point where I owned so many CDs that I hadn't listened to that I just couldn't justify keeping all of them. So I got rid of everything. There wasn't really a whole lot of gray area there in my decision making. I just got rid of a whole bunch of it. But you know, I'm happy to have this one because I've listened to it in the years since I've sold it a little bit. And I think it's darker. I think it's a little darker than Songs from the Big Chair, and arguably maybe more progressive. Kind of more the new romantic period meeting new wave meeting progressive. So it's a fascinating record, and Mad World is, again, it's like head over heels. It's a song you cannot poke any holes into. Flawless songwriting, flawless production, flawless performance. So that's all I have to say about this one. I'm actually looking forward to hearing it again because it's been a little while, and I don't know it that well. But yeah, Tears for Fears. I even love their new record. And I woke up with a song from that in my head the other day. So I'm going to have to get that on Atmos, the Blu-ray of that, before too much longer, because I've heard it on streaming a number of times, and it's really good. Like, these guys, you know, their music stands the test of time. And I'm sure that, you know, they were popular in the 80s, and, you know, I'm sure there were those who may have assumed that they were just a flash in the pan. But I think that they've actually managed to stay relevant with a lot of their writing, and their most recent record is tremendous. Like, there's absolutely nothing there to criticize. I think that I think Tears for Fears are geniuses. All right, 2 great albums here coming up. Well, one great album and one flawed but great. We'll say that flawed to great album. First up, we have the Emperor Palpatine album, Peter Gabriel 2, aka Scratch. And this one was produced by Robert Fripp, who's one of my absolute favorite guitar players. And I just recently impulsively purchased the Massive Exposures box set, only to realize that oh my gosh, I have 1,000 hours of soundscapes to listen to now. But this is actually produced at the same period as the Exposure album, like 1978, and it shares the title track. The title track from Exposure is on this, and I love that. I love the sharing of tunes between the Gabriel projects and the Robert Fripp projects, because of course you have Here Comes the Flood on Exposure, which is one of my absolute favorite Peter Gabriel songs, and I just love how he's kind of featured at the tail end of the Exposure album. But White Shadow on this album is absolutely fantastic song, and I think that of all the early Gabriel albums, this is the punkiest, and I think he's kind of in rail mode still. He's still in back in New York City mode for a lot of this, especially the opening song, On the Air, where he's just screaming, and it's so infectious. You know, he's such a great voice. I was listening to this last night for the first time in years and was just kind of surprised, because I always thought that it was like a 3 out of 5 star Gabriel album, but I think I may have to revise my opinion. It's not a masterpiece. It's flawed, but it's got some great stuff on it, and it's so worth owning, I think. Now, this one, Peter Gabriel 3, aka Melt, is phenomenal, and I would put this up easily with the best of his Genesis work, and it may even be better than some of his Genesis work. This one is just, you cannot poke any holes in it. There's just nothing but wall-to-wall great songs on it. You have Intruder, which originated the snare drum sound of the 80s. Like, Peter Gabriel is creating the 80s, for better or for worse, with his old bud Phil Collins on drums, and you have No Self-Control with those amazing bursts from Robert Fripp, and these lyrics about bipolar disorder and OCD and mental illness. I actually read today, someone said that every song on this deals with some sort of mental illness, with the exception of Biko, which is a fascinating idea. I'll have to listen to it again and see if I agree. But I Don't Remember is great. It's so catchy. Family Snapshot has some of the best lyrics in his career. And I love In Through the Wire. It may be my least favorite song on the album, but it's got some fascinating keyboard work from Larry Fast and textures that I think are so interesting. And it kept making me think about how, in some of the Genesis documentaries, Peter Gabriel was talking about how protective Tony Banks was over the keyboards, and how he had specific ideas that Tony Banks was like, no, can't do that. And it makes me wonder how much of these parts that Larry Fast is playing were based off of stuff that Gabriel wrote, and how much he had to do with that. So yeah, it's a really interesting song texturally, but Games Without Frontiers is, I think, probably everybody's first favorite Peter Gabriel song. I mean, maybe Salisbury Hill is, but I remember the first time I heard this just being so captivated by it. And I didn't know until last night that Kate Bush is singing the main, the French lyrics, the ones that have been misheard over the years hilariously, is actually Kate Bush, which I didn't know until last night, and I think that's amazing. But this song and Not One of Us, I think Not One of Us possibly rivals Family Snapshot as being the best set of lyrics on this album. It's so relevant and in a startling and disturbing way. And it's one of those Gabriel lyrics that just runs through my head constantly. Such a wonderfully constructed song. Lead a Normal Life is pretty interesting. If I recall, it's kind of ambient. And then leading into Biko, a song that I did not love back when I first heard this, but I love the way it kind of grooves out at the end of the record and just kind of sits there. It takes its time. It's not rushing to get to some sort of climax. It's just a slow burn and kind of a mood. I really dig this album. I think that, talking about great Peter Gabriel discs, I think that this sits perfectly in with the best of the Genesis material while being totally different and edgier sounding. But at the same time, it also is the beginning of a great run of Peter Gabriel albums. This one and the two that follow are, to me, his peak, with Security and So Peter Gabriel 3, aka Melt. I love this album. I listened to this last night, just cranked up the volume. It's so good. All right, a couple more. This is one that I've never owned before. That may surprise a lot of you. I think I maybe have heard it once. It's I think this is Phil Collins' first solo. Yeah, his solo debut, Face Value. And again, many ways shaping the sound of the 80s and kind of picking up on the drum production style that started with Peter Gabriel 3. Like, I think that these two albums are definitely related. And, as a Genesis fan, I find that so fascinating because to me, you have a lot of groups like Pink Floyd who hate each other. And you have these two, close to 80-year-old men who just cannot work their crap out. And it frustrates me so much. And then you look at Genesis who, they broke up, they lost members, but it seems like there wasn't any hard feelings. I mean, I don't know about Hackett. Maybe Hackett had some hard feelings, but it seems like, Gabriel and Genesis could coexist with one another. And Phil Collins as a solo artist could also coexist. I find that so fascinating. And everything that I've kind of looked into as to kind of the reason that everyone continued to be successful is because they supported one another. They continued to be friends. They continued to listen to one another and be influenced by one another. And in a lot of ways, I think the 80s Genesis albums would not sound the way that they do, had Phil Collins not performed on Intruder. So I'm really excited actually to give this another listen with an open mind. I know it's poppier, which may not be my thing. I may not love this album, but I still think this guy is one of the great talents in pop music. You watch like videos of Genesis from the early 70s where he's singing backup and playing drums at the same time, and then it's mind-blowing that 3 years later he's leading the band. And just a few short years after that, he's an international pop star. Like, it may not always be my kind of music, but I find Phil Collins absolutely fascinating as a musician. And, everybody in Genesis, I think, is fascinating as a musician, but he's definitely one of the most fascinating figures of the band. But yeah, Phil Collins' Face Value. Not much to say about this album because I've never heard it really, other than In the Air Tonight. And of course, Behind the Lines I'm familiar with from Duke. But actually, I'm really curious about this, and I'm looking forward to hearing it. So yeah, once again, Phil Collins, Face Value. All right, here's another left turn stylistically. We're back into full prog mode with Renaissance, Carnegie Hall Live. Now, I saw Renaissance in 2012. So in fact, I think they played almost everything on this because it was the Scheherazade and Turn of the Cards tour, and they played both of them front to back. And that seems to be a lot of the material on here, which is why I wanted to get it. These guys, I don't know. They can be a little bit, again, the prog that I don't like at times. But of course, Annie Haslam's voice is gorgeous. I'm interested in giving these guys another shot. Again, like they aren't a huge favorite of mine, but Mother Russia is a great tune. So yeah, I just thought I'd show it because it was cool to have these guys back in my collection again. I think I still have a signed copy of Scheherazade and Other Stories that I had signed at the gig I saw. So maybe I'll show that. But yeah, Renaissance Live. This is the Repertoire Records version, made in Germany. Repertoire Records kind of have a mixed reputation for me. Some of their stuff is kind of heavy-handed mastering-wise, and I don't care for it. So I don't know. I didn't read much about the mastering on this to know what it sounds like. So you'll have to, maybe you'll have to let me know if you're familiar with this recording. Is this a good version of this recording? It seems like it is, but let me know. Okay, the final stack. First off, we have the debut recording from one of my favorite singers and favorite artists, Kate Bush. And when she got popular again, I mean, really in a lot of ways for the first time in America, when she got popular last year, I was so happy for her. And I got angry with people who, seemed to be trying to discredit her or take that away from her and say, I've never heard of her. I've been listening to Kate Bush for a decade or more. From the first time I heard Wuthering Heights, I was a fan because her voice is so unique and beautiful. And her music, it's like the early Genesis in a way. It casts a spell. But it's totally different. Like you can hear the influence of a lot of British stuff like Roxy Music, Pink Floyd, indeed Genesis and Peter Gabriel. But she's very much her own thing, and you can hear her sensibilities beginning here. I think this is an excellent album. It maybe isn't as good as what came after, because what came after, especially the ones you're about to see, I think are unmatched. But I love the song "The Man with the Child in His Eyes." What a beautiful tune that is. I love the saxophone song. I love James and the Cold Gun. This is good stuff, and this is the beginning. There's more greatness to come. There's even better stuff to come. Kate Bush, The Kick Inside. So happy to have this one back. I listened to it last night, about half of it. Again, it was just so sweet hearing that again. All right. Gonna try to hit these the Kate Bush collection all at once. Lionheart. This is another album I've never heard before, which is cool. It's great to be discovering new things. With the exception of Hammer Horror, which is a great track. It's one of my favorite Kate Bush tracks. And Wow, which is fun. I've never heard any of this. So it's a totally new experience from an artist I love. And it's vintage Kate. This is still the early years. I think Never Forever is like her first masterpiece. And I already have that one, which is why it's not included in this haul. I'm so excited to dive into her back catalog more because I'm familiar with like the three main ones are the ones that I'm most familiar with. But it's kind of cool to go back and kind of hear her develop. I love the back cover too. I think it's because she's beautiful and her eyes are gorgeous and striking. But I love the imagery of her albums and kind of like that English Gothic Hammer Horror aesthetic, especially with a song called Hammer Horror included in that cover art. But she's phenomenal. These ones are just, this is the best. Like both of these. The Dreaming, one of my absolute favorite albums. I owned both of these already, but I got them for like $1 each, which again, like I couldn't resist, especially since Hounds of Love, the remaster that I have, has a kind of jarring alternate mix of The Big Sky that, even though I've never heard the original mix, when I listen to it, I can tell that it doesn't fit with the mixing of the rest of the album. And that always bothered me. So I'm excited to hear what it originally sounded like, or at least the album version sounded like. Always cool to hear these 80s discs because in a lot of ways they're better than people gave them credit for. There's that whole message on the back about, how it's a higher definition format and it reveals limitations of the source. And I think that gave people the idea that maybe CDs were no good, but the reality is they're fantastic. Especially early 80s. There's something about the sound of those that's so lifelike and organic to me. And I can only imagine it's because they transferred them without messing with them too much. They didn't try to color the sound or add any kind of EQ. I don't know. I mean, obviously I wasn't around back then to tell you, but to me it feels more, when I listen to some of these early 80s discs, it feels more like a really good, pristine vinyl copy, or even just hearing it on tape, which I like. And it's reproduced every time you hear it. And that's what I love about it. These CDs don't really wear out, like in the way that records do. But yeah, the only other thing to say is the Dreaming is one of my favorite albums, period. It's more experimental. Although of course with Hounds of Love, you have the Ninth Wave, which is the experimental track. But this one is just, she as she once said, the She's Gone Off the Rails album. And I admire it so much. There's so many great ideas, so many great songs on this album. And I can't wait to listen to it because, again, like I've got the remaster, and I think I actually even own this one on vinyl. That's how much I love it. So I'd be curious to compare this to both versions, the vinyl and the remaster, see which one I prefer. Because I may just prefer the remaster. Sometimes that does happen. All right, one more Kate Bush before we move on. This is another one I've never heard before, The Sensual World. I'm actually not that familiar with Kate post Hounds of Love. I've heard a few albums. I've heard like Ariel and Before the Dawn. But for the most part, I'm not familiar with any of her work past Hounds of Love, and that's one of my favorite albums. So really curious to hear this one and see what this is all about. And not much more to say other than if you're a Kate Bush fan and you're screaming, these are my favorite albums. I love Lionheart. I love The Sensual World. Let me know in the comments. I would appreciate your feedback. And with as much as I adore the other Kate Bush records, I would definitely put them at the top of my listening pile if you think they're amazing. So let me know. All right, Kate Bush, The Sensual World. Okay, on to the last part of the pile. This is probably going to go really quickly because not much to say about these. Porcupine Tree, Signify. I am a major Steven Wilson fan. Not just his music, which, his music can be a little hit or miss with me, even though I love Porcupine Tree. His solo stuff, sometimes I'm into it, and then other times I think, I don't know. But as a producer, and especially his work with the surround sound series, the 5.1 series, and now Atmos, he's one of my absolute heroes in terms of audio production, the audio production world. So I was happy to get this because it's been ages since I've heard it. I know it's kind of, I guess, more psychedelic because I'm more familiar with Porcupine Tree post In Absentia. So I'm really curious to hear this one again because it's been a lot of years. I don't really remember it that well. This might be arguably the best find in the set. It's a sealed copy of Deadwing, printed in Japan. I love the Deadwing album. This is an album that I had prior to my move that's disappeared. So I'm just really glad to have it, but it seems to be a cool version with an extra disc. And I think that it's just like a compilation of other prior Porcupine Tree tracks. So this is a cool find, and it's sealed too. And I got it really inexpensively. So pretty excited to hear this one again. I love Arriving Somewhere and Not Here. I love Lazarus on this one. Yeah, I love Lazarus, Mellotron Scratch, Open Car, Halo. It's a great album. It's one of their very best. And super happy to have this in my collection again because the only other Porcupine Tree album I own is Closure Continuation. I used to have In Absentia and Fear of a Blank Planet and a few others, but I don't know. I don't remember selling them is the thing. And so I'm so happy to have this back. And at the same time, like a little bit nervous about cracking it open because it is a brand new disc and that's cool. But, music is meant to be heard and enjoyed and not put on a shelf and admired. It's not art. I mean, it is art, but it's not visual art. Music is something that you engage with and enjoy and listen to. So I'm definitely looking forward to cracking this open at the right time and enjoying it. So lastly, I'm going to end on an album that I know absolutely nothing about. Honestly, the only reason why I picked it was because my friend and colleague and client, Dave Newhouse, loves it. And I thought, well, you know what? For $1, I'll grab it. And next time Dave talks about it, I'll give it a listen. And I can add something to the conversation. But I've never heard any Fleetwood Mac outside of the singles, pretty much. And I think there is one kind of really popular song on this. Rattlesnake Shake. Yeah, I've heard that one. But yeah, I've never heard Rumors or any of those like big Fleetwood Mac albums. So really curious about this again, especially since, it's one that my friend likes. And it might be good to hear that, for that reason. So, all right, that's the last one from the Giant Hall. And I know it's kind of a anticlimax because I have very little to say about this one, but, yeah, if you really like it, you'll have to let me know. Cause I would love some engagement, on these and just let me know what your favorite is. Like if you see something here in this pile and you're like, oh man, that's such a great disc, and why don't you listen to that? Let me know. I mean, even if it's one that I talked about profusely and you love it, and you just want to start a conversation about it, let me know in the comments. I think it would be cool. There's a lot of like vinyl community stuff out there, but I think it would be cool to get like a little CD community going because I've always preferred CDs. Even though my band's got a record out now, I've always preferred CDs because it must be a generational thing. I'm a 90s kid, and that's kind of the format. I grew up at the time when cassettes were kind of fading and CDs were becoming more popular. So maybe that's part of it, but I also like the fact that they sound so good and they sound good every time. There's no degradation. And there's other problems with vinyl, like like when you go towards the center of the record, a lot of times it loses quality, which I think is not good. I don't enjoy that. So I like hearing perfect reproduction. I like hearing the imperfections in the source, as a lot of these older discs say. So yeah, I would just be curious to hear any feedback whatsoever on the video and how you feel about CDs, and hopefully get a little discussion going. All right, so that's it for me for today. Thank you for joining me as we trawl through the hall. The next video I'd like to do is a video about collecting Genesis by the disc, and I'd like to show the various versions that I've managed to collect and pick up over the past month or so, and I would also like to start a discussion about what are the best sounding versions. I think that would be kind of a fun thing to do. But until then, it's been real nice talking to you, and I hope you enjoyed this. My name's Ian Beabout, and I'll be back real soon. All right. Bye-bye.